Church rocks. And on that note, we're going to travel back in time to the 1970s, and we're going to pretend that we are rebels in school. So I'm going to put on some of my rebel outfit right now, and I want you to listen and pay attention to this from the 1970s. I have a leather jacket with me. Maybe that'll make me look a little bit more like a rebel. What do you think? Should I put on a do-rag? I don't know. That might be a little bit over the top. I'm not sure. Now listen to this last line here. Pay attention. What do they mean by that in that song? What are those rebels afraid of? Well, you know, we're not 100% sure. I hope I can get this jacket off. But we do have a little bit of an idea. And you know what that is? It's a matter of significance. I think what they're afraid of is they don't want to be another brick in the wall. They don't want to be in some dead institution where they have no significance, no hope, and it's just kind of blah. And you see, that's why I'm a little bit nervous today with this message about church rocks, because what it's about is this. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you're a born-again believer, the Bible says that you are a stone. Whoops. A stone? Okay, the school rebels don't want to be another brick in the wall. Here in this church, are we just another stone in the wall of some dead institution? Not at all. That's not what this is about. You see, we are living stones, and we are built on the foundation of Jesus Christ into this wonderful, living, dynamic, spiritual house. That's what it's all about. That's the relationship between Christ and his church. And that's what we mean today when we say church rocks. Living stones being built into a spiritual house. Let's take a look at this passage now from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. You can find it in your own Bibles, perhaps pull it up on an app on your phone, or it can be found on page 1204 of the Pew Bibles. And while you're going there, we'll remind you that this book of 1 Peter is a book that the Apostle Peter obviously wrote to a bunch of scattered Christians, scattered due to persecution, encouraging them to live a holy life before God and to keep on feeding on his word, the milk of the word, so that they may grow. And then we get to today's passage where he tells them specifically what their role is and the relationship is in the church to Jesus Christ. 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning at verse 4. Let's look at it now. Peter says, "As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, 'Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame.' So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And there ends the lesson. So let's talk about church rocks, living stones being built into a spiritual house. Before we talk about the rocks or the stones, let's talk about the building process. Peter says, as you come to him, it's a continual process that you keep coming to Christ. It begins with an initial act of faith, and then it continues through worship, prayer, growing in holiness, feeding on the milk of the word. As we do that, we're being built up into a spiritual house. That's what this means. Now, the building materials, speaking of the rocks, are church rocks or living stones. Not dead bricks, not dead stones, living stones. And you know, it might sound kind of insulting if you don't understand that we're talking about living stones, because for Peter to refer to Jesus and frankly to us as stones is kind of insulting. You see, you will never have a more boring time than if you hang around all day trying to socialize with a stone. Let me show you. This is very boring. I'm not getting much out of this stone. And I don't think there's much of anything I could do to get this stone to socialize with me. I don't think so. Hey, did you hear about the miner that was ticked off? He gave everybody the cold shoulder. Do you know why the stone took speech class? Because he wanted his presentations to get bolder. I think that's great. And how about this one? Did you hear about the rock who was interrogated by the police? He finally cracked. Have you had enough of this? I think so. Let's see, at least some of you are either rolling your eyes or laughing or saying, would you please get this over with? But a stone, a rock, nothing. And yet that's what we're being called here. We're a bunch of rocks, we're a bunch of stones. But remember, we are living stones. We're not like a dead brick or rock or stone, meaning that we're nothing. We are alive. Let's put this guy away. So what do we mean here? What kinds of stones are we talking about? What are the major stones? Well, the one is the chosen and precious cornerstone, Jesus. He was chosen by God the Father. We get that. He was precious. We understand what that means. But he's a cornerstone. What in the world's a cornerstone? Well, according to the Holman Bible Dictionary, let me read this for you. The cornerstone is the stone laid at the corner of a building to bind two walls together and to strengthen them. You see, the cornerstone set the agenda for the rest of the building. Once you lay the cornerstone, then you know the direction that this thing is going back and forth, left and right, up and down, and you can build the rest of the building. It's the foundation. That's who Jesus is. The foundation, precious to God the Father, chosen by him. Then in verse 6, Peter quotes Isaiah 28:16, where the laying of this stone was prophesied many years before Jesus came on the scene, prophesied as the chief cornerstone. That's where that quote comes from. Behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a precious cornerstone. Isaiah prophesied that. That shows that being the cornerstone, Jesus being the cornerstone, was a part of God's plan all along. The foundation to the church. And those who believe in him never put to shame by believing in the foundation. Now, the other living stones are the followers of Jesus. That's us. We come together like a bunch of building stones built on the chief cornerstone. And according to his agenda, his direction, his plan, we're built together into something. What are we built into? We are built into this building, a spiritual house, not a physical house or a building, but we are a spiritual house. Not literal stones, not a literal building, living stones built into a spiritual house. Now, if you go up here to Wurtsville Road, that's Route 944, and go 2.5 miles to the west and look on your left, you will see St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Now, do any of you locals or old-timers out there know what the people in the area call that church? Nobody knows? The Old Stone Church. Very good. And my wife isn't even local. She's a coal cracker. That's a different kind of stone, if you will. She grew up in the coal region. So I guess you do know a lot about stones. The Old Stone Church. Well, here's the deal. If I were king of the Wurtsville Road, and I had the authority to call all the shots around here, I wouldn't call that place the Old Stone Church, because I have a problem with that phrase. What we're talking about is the Old Stone Church building. But the actual church, that's not made of stones, literal stones, because the real church isn't the building. The real church is the people. It consists of the people, the living stones. That's why Peter says that we're being built up into a spiritual house. What do we mean by a spiritual house? Romans chapter 1 and verse 11 says the following. Romans 1:11 says, "For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you." A spiritual house is influenced by the Holy Spirit. We, as living stones, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, what do? According to verse 5, we offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. We're a holy priesthood. Do you ever think about that? We're all priests. And some of you might say, gee, does that mean I should go out and get one of those black shirts with the little tab in the front that looks like somebody cut it out of a Clorox bottle? No, we're not talking about that kind of a priest, of course. We're talking about priests that offer spiritual sacrifices to God. That's what we do as priests and living stones. How do we do that? A couple of different ways. The first way is by giving our bodies totally and completely to God's service. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, the Apostle Paul says, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." There you go. Giving of our bodies, our very lives. That's an act of worship. That's a priestly function. Another thing is to give gifts in the spreading of the gospel. When you either went on the app, if you did this, or wrote a check, or used your bill payer to give to the work of the kingdom, or to some other kingdom thing beyond our church, that's an act of worship. Philippians 4:18, the Apostle Paul told the Philippians, "I received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts that you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God." That was an act of worship by the Philippians. Also, we sang praises this morning to God, and we're going to do a little bit more of that at the end of the service. Did you know that this also is an act of worship, a sacrifice, being a priest before God? Hebrews 13:15 says, "Through him let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God. That is the fruit of lips that acknowledge his name," offering praises, "and sharing our possessions with others." The next verse, verse 16, "Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." Generosity is an act of worship. It's an act of being part of the priesthood as a living stone. That's why we come here. That's what this is about. And some of you might think, "Well, we thought you liked coming here so that when you send a report into the conference, you can say there's a big number, a lot of people coming here." No, that's not it. And that's on my mind, by the way, because I have to send in that cotton picking report to them by Tuesday. I hope I remember to do that. But you know what? That's not why we're here. That's not the big deal. Someone else might say, well, I only come here because I don't want my wife to crab at me. That's not a good reason to be here. That's not why we're supposed to be here. I notice that the bubs are laughing about this. I'd like to find out why after this service. I will be very interested to find out why. Or how about this one? The reason I come here is because the pews, the candles, the hymns, the hymnals, all of this churchy stuff reminds me of Grandma. We're not here to have warm, fuzzy, sentimental feelings about Grandma. That's not why we're here. We are living stones being built up into a spiritual house as priests to worship God with Jesus as the chief cornerstone. That's what this is all about. That's what you need to know about church rocks. Now, Peter goes on in verses 7 to 8 to make it very clear to distinguish those who are living stones, those who are church rocks, versus those who are not. In verse 7, Peter says that the honor of being a believer, a living stone in God's house, goes to those who believe. But the honor does not go to those who do not believe. That's why he quotes Psalm 118 and verse 22 in verse 11. If you didn't realize that, that's exactly what that is. That's a quote from that psalm. The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief corner, or has become the cornerstone. So in other words, somehow these builders throw out a building material and they throw the baby out with the bathwater because they get rid of the cornerstone, the most important thing. That's pretty dumb, isn't it? That's pretty ridiculous. Well, what does Peter mean by this? What's this all about? Jesus talked about this in Matthew chapter 21, verses 42 to 43. Believe it or not, to refer to the religious leaders of his day. Let's look at this, what he said to them, because he quotes this same psalm to these religious leaders, because they were the ones that threw out the baby with the bathwater, got rid of the stone that was the chief cornerstone. Matthew 21, verses 42 to 43, it says, Jesus said to them, these religious hotshots, have you never read in the scripture, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? There it is again. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, you religious hotshots, that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. You see, those builders, they wanted to build a religious system, all right. Oh, yeah, they did. But when the cornerstone showed up, no. This is the way it's going to be done. That didn't match their blueprints. Their blueprints were different than God's blueprints, so they took that most important part of the building, Jesus Christ, the chief cornerstone, and said, we don't want him out. And Peter says that those rejectors not only are the ones that Jesus mentioned, if you go back to 1 Peter 1 or 2:7, but it's anyone who does not believe has rejected the chief cornerstone. Then in verse 8, Peter quotes Isaiah 8 and verse 14. Let me get back there a minute with you. That's where it says, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. Okay. So not only do they reject Christ, the cornerstone, but he becomes a stumbling block to them. They can't take him. You see, just because someone comes to a church 52 weeks out of a year and sits there doesn't mean that they're necessarily a living stone. The question is to each and every person, who is Jesus to you? Is he the chief cornerstone? Do you believe that he is the Son of Man and Son of God? Is he your Savior and Lord? Is he your chief cornerstone? Because if we don't believe that, then we're not living stones, and he's just going to be a stumbling block to us. But if we believe, then he is our chief cornerstone. And then Peter says something at the tail end of verse 8 that may sound confusing. Listen to this now. Okay, they stumble. This is those non-living stones, the non-believers. They stumble because they disobey the word. Listen to this now. As they were destined to do. What? They were destined to do that? There are some Christians from other traditions outside the churches of God who interpret that to mean that God has destined or predestined these non-believers to disobey and therefore incur the punishment of stumbling. Now others, including myself and the churches of God, we would interpret this to mean that God has predestined that those who choose to disobey will incur the punishment of stumbling. In other words, how do you interpret the verse? Basically, what is it that God has predestined? Has he predestined the criminals to commit the crime, that is, that non-believers would disobey the word, or has he predestined it such that those who freely do choose to disobey the word will incur a punishment? In other words, has he predestined the punishment? That's what I would argue. Now you might say, well, how do you know that's to be true? Well, people interpret the Bible different ways, but I'm going by another passage where this same Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 14 is quoted, and that's in Romans 9, 30 to 33. I'm going to go there with you very briefly and read this. We won't take a lot of time with this, but we want you to see this. In Romans 9, 30 to 33, a different apostle now quoting this same Isaiah passage says this: "What shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness," they chose not to pursue righteousness, "have attained it," that is, a righteousness that is by faith, "but Israel pursued a law that would lead to righteousness and did not succeed in reaching that law." Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith. They chose not to pursue it, but as if it were based on works. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written, here we go, Isaiah 8:14 again, "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense." So you hear it there. What Paul is saying is those who chose to not pursue righteousness, which means to disobey, they incurred the punishment of stumbling. So what did God destine or predestine? He didn't predestine the criminals to commit the crime, that is, the non-believers to not believe, but rather he predestined it to be such that when they didn't believe, when they freely chose not to obey but to disobey, they would incur the punishment, the consequences of the punishment. Okay, enough about that. Maybe that was too much to go into, but it's a very significant theological point that people ask about all the time. The bottom line that we need to know is if you don't believe Jesus is the chief cornerstone, if you don't believe in him, you're not a church rock, you're not a living stone. But remember those who are church rocks in verses 9 to 10. Peter says in verse 9, "But you, those of you who believe, you are a chosen race," not a biological race. And by the way, there only is one race, Acts 17:26, Adam's race. All of us deceived from Adam and Eve. But we know that in Adam all died, but in Christ we're made alive. Because we believe in Jesus, we're part of God's chosen race, the sons and daughters of God. We're a royal priesthood, again, offering up those sacrifices like we talked about, he says here in verse 9. We're a holy nation, not a nation like Israel, United States, Canada, Mexico. No, but the people of God, set apart to do his will. A people for God's own possession. We are his people. We are all of that as living stones. But watch out. Notice in verse 9 that with all of those wonderful privileges and those wonderful titles comes a responsibility. You're a holy nation, royal priesthood, people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his light. We proclaim his excellencies. We don't keep quiet about who we are. That's our responsibility. With privilege comes responsibility. Does anybody know what's kicking off at 6:30 p.m. tonight? Oh, my word. Okay. Well, I will tell you, it is a football game on TV called the Super Bowl. Didn't anybody know that? Wow, nobody knew that. Okay, well, the Super Bowl is on at 6:30 p.m. tonight. I am shocked. Now, can you imagine the honor that it is right now to be either a Ram or a Bengal? Those are, by the way, the two teams that are playing, if you didn't know that. The Rams and the Bengals, if you will. And those people that are Rams or Bengals, I mean, wow, that's a big deal. You're a part of the Super Bowl in 2022. And those guys can't, though, just show up with that honor and say, I'm in the Super Bowl and I'm a running back. I'm a wide receiver. I'm a tight end and I'm here at the Super Bowl. They can't just sit there and keep that privilege and do nothing. No, with that privilege, they got to get up and get into the game. And that's the point. To be a living stone in God's house, it's a privilege, but it has its responsibilities. We need to get into the game and proclaim the excellencies of God. And then Peter ends this passage in verse 7 by reminding us that we weren't always God's people, but thanks to God's people, we are now the people of God. What a blessing. What a privilege. Church rocks. Not everyone is a living stone in God's house, but those of us who believe in Jesus and believe that he is our chief cornerstone, we are a part of a living and dynamic spiritual house. You're not just another brick in the wall or a stone in the wall, a dead, lifeless stone. We are living stones, and we are part of a living, thriving, growing spiritual house. That's the relationship between Christ and his church. That's what you need to know about Church Rocks. Amen.